Now, for those who haven't been with us so far, I want to introduce myself. I am Becky Fry. I'm the principal planner for the Long Range Planning Division. I am one of the project managers for Redmond 2050, which is our project to update the vision for the future of the city of Redmond. So this evening, I'm going to be sharing with you about accommodating growth in Overlake. This is just the introduction to some conversations about Overlake and what we're going to do around the light rail stations. We do anticipate these conversations to be ongoing for the next 12 to 15 months as we really negotiate some of these questions and start to narrow in on some options and alternatives and pick the ones that we feel is going to be best for our community, and then draft code and policy updates. So we are using Menti tonight for your feedback. In the chat for this meeting, there is a link for Menti. I will, if you do not see it, excuse me, I can copy and paste that back in. But this is just kind of a way to test make sure everybody is able to get into Menti and make it work. So great. So if anybody's having any issues with Menti, just let me know. If you can't access the link in chat, just go to menti.com and click on 3004-5409. Okay. Is anybody having any issues? Do we need to pause here and solve some more technical? We good?
It's working for me.
Okay. All right. Well, let me know if we need to. Oh, there we go. We got one more. All right. All right. It looks like we've got all 5. All right. So it looks like we're working. So thank you for letting us know how your relationship is with Redmond. If you could just really quickly let us know how you heard about today's meeting. This just lets us know how effective some of our communication methods are or ineffective, and if we need to do something different to try to reach out to some folks. There you go. Email and text. Okay. That's great. A consultant. That's really good to know. Word is getting around. Okay. Great. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, coworker. Perfect. Okay, so first I want to set some context because we have the Overlake neighborhood, and I want to let you know we're not talking about the entire Overlake neighborhood. So just make very clear up front. What we are talking about is the Overlake Village or the Overlake Urban Center, which is a portion of the Overlake neighborhood. And this is how it stands currently, but what we are doing is proposing an expansion. We're going to go up to 51st Street. We are not touching the residential neighborhoods that are along this border, and there's some business up above 51st that's within the Overlake neighborhood that we're not extending to as well. So this is the area, this area in blue, that we're actually referring to when we talk about Overlake this evening. So just wanted to set that context and just be clear about that. If you could let us know how you relate to Overlake, if you live in the village area or in the neighborhood, but not in the village, if you live near Overlake in Redmond or in Bellevue or elsewhere in Redmond or something else other. Again, this just helps helps us understand who we're reaching and who we're not reaching. We need to wait. And I want to apologize in advance. My asthma is really not great this evening. So I apologize for the coughing, and I'll just do my best to work through it. Great. Overlake Village area. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Okay. So just a little bit of context. I'm not going to spend too much time on the background. We did cover this in our TOD, or Transit Oriented Development Workshop, a couple weeks ago. But I just, for context, over 20 years we've been preparing for the light rail stations, but now we're shifting gears and we're actually moving towards the opening of the light rail stations in just a couple of years. And so we're looking at the zoning and land uses and development standards around those light rail stations. We're also rezoning around the stations, and in particular in Overlake, for two primary reasons. One, to accommodate the growth that we've been assigned, and I will talk to you about that in that process. And also just looking at the highest and best uses that are transit supportive densities, transit supportive uses, all of those pieces and parts are going to be folded into our rezoning. We're also going to be looking at development standards and incentive packages, but I'm not going to go into those this evening. There will be another workshop in a couple of weeks where we will be diving into that topic. But I did want to give you a heads up for those of you who are especially working in Overlake and on projects in Overlake. We are going to be rezoning. We are going to be making some pretty significant changes to the zoning districts in Overlake. We're not exactly sure what we're doing quite yet, but we are at the early stages and we're going to be involving the community in those conversations. Just for context, if you're not familiar with how growth allocations work in Washington State, we are a growth management state, which means we're top down in a lot of aspects about planning for our local communities. And growth allocations and growth planning is one of those topics. So the state starts by putting together a range of growth, so a low, medium, and high range of growth, and they distribute that out. And in our area, that goes to our regional planning authority, which is Puget Sound Regional Council. In other areas, it might go straight to the county. The Puget Sound Regional Council then took the growth projections that the state developed for our 4-county region and said, okay, how are we going to distribute that between our counties, between our communities? What are our policies for growth management that we want to set at a regional level? And then it goes to the counties. It went to King County, and King County said, okay, we have been assigned a portion of the growth that was going to our region, and then we are going to assign that growth to our communities. So at the county level, they say how much each city in our county is going to have to accommodate. And then we have to be in compliance with all of those things. So we're assigned growth, and I'll walk you through a little bit more of what that looked like. So at Puget Sound Regional Council, what they did is they said, well, we're going to assign growth by types of communities. So Seattle and Bellevue are our region's metropolitan cities. They're our largest communities. So they get a larger chunk of the growth than anywhere else. Then comes core cities, which Redmond is a core city. They're larger communities than, say, North Bend or Bothell or some of the other smaller communities. Then we've got some high capacity transit communities, some cities and towns, and then unincorporated and rural. So as you can see, the bulk of the growth is assigned to these areas where transit and where large communities are already established. And then if you look down, they also decided that they're going to split it regionally as well by counties. So King County was assigned more growth than anybody else in our region. And they did something similar with employment projections. So as you can see, Seattle and Bellevue are allocated more than everybody else, and then the core cities where Redmond is, we get the next biggest chunk. So Redmond's going to be assigned more growth than some other communities are, just because we are considered a core city. So what does that mean? So for Redmond, we have been allocated through this process, and they use 2019 to 2044 as their target years, 2,400 new jobs and 24,000 new jobs and 20,000 housing units. For the City of Redmond's project, we're looking out to 2050. So what we did is we took the average annual growth rate and we just extrapolated that out a couple more years, and we went to 2050. So we're looking at approximately 30,000 new jobs and 25,000 new housing units by 2050. Now, I just want to put an asterisk on new jobs. We understand that Microsoft is a big unknown, and they may come out with that much growth by themselves. They're in the middle of a campus planning project. They don't know exactly how much they want to grow in this time frame yet, so we're just going to go with this allocation process, but we do every 8 years get allocated more, and we might make some adjustments as we find out more about what Redmond and Microsoft is going to be doing. So what we've been working on for the past year is putting together a couple different growth scenarios. So baseline, this one here is if we don't change anything as far as our zoning capacity is, this is what growth would look like. This is where we have vacant land or underdeveloped properties that are ripe for redevelopment. For instance, if it has a $4,000 shack on a property that's worth multi-millions, then we're going to call it redevelopable. So there's definitely a series of criteria that would have to go through. But if we did nothing, this is what growth would look like. This is how it would end up being distributed. It does not meet our growth allocation targets. So we are going to be developing and looking at two other alternatives. The center's alternative is something that we have been doing as a city for the last couple of decades. We've been really focusing on our centers, so on our downtown and on Overlake. So the center's model is just kind of a continuation of that. We're really focusing most of that growth into those areas, adding Marymore as a part of a center. And then the centers and corridors was an alternative that was in response to some feedback that we've been getting for the last several years from some development and just looking at equity issues too, distributional equity. If we put all of our new affordable housing in one area, what does that mean? So there's definitely some reasons for considering and looking at other options. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We are developing these scenarios and they are moving forward into an evaluation process for environmental review, our transportation modeling, all of those pieces and parts. And we're going to be doing growth scenarios in our draft environmental impact statement, which will be released early next year. But since we have these scenarios, we can now take a look at what is the impact to Overlake. So for these scenarios, we're looking at a range of growth of 10 to 12,000 new jobs and 8 to 10,000 new housing units in Overlake, in the urban center. So we have a lot of questions about what is that going to look like, exactly how close to the stations do we want to focus, what do we want to protect and preserve as we go through. So we're going to be looking forward to those, and we're going to be talking about those a little bit tonight. But again, this is really just the start of the conversation, but just keep this in mind. It's a significant amount of growth, no matter which scenario. So we're going to be doing some pretty major changes in Overlake zoning. So again, as I mentioned, some other considerations that we're going to be diving into is what do we want to preserve in Overlake as we start to redevelop? And what do we need to add to Overlake to make sure that we have the services and amenities that will be needed there? And not just for the residents, but the businesses as well. So what do we need to serve the community members? What amenities are needed? And then, of course, how and where do we accommodate the expected growth? Specifically, we want to dive into tonight and get a feel for the community's preferences for how close or how far from the stations do we want that growth to occur, and thus the impacts to occur. So before I dive too deeply into any of those, I do want to mention that Redmond 2050 has 3 primary themes that run through everything we do. All of our policy options and alternatives are going to be looked at from these lenses: the equity and inclusion, sustainability, and resiliency. And we have definitions, what does that mean, or statements of intent. And we have preliminary checklists all available on our website. So if you are interested in that, we encourage you to check out our website. We also have on our Let's Connect site a forum for discussion of these topics. So let's dive into the first one. I have a couple of answers preloaded from earlier today, but please let us know what you want to preserve. What do you value in Overlake today? What is special? What is a part of that community that we want to have around in the future, protect, preserve, celebrate? What about Overlake do we want to preserve? And there's a couple of things. Diversity popped up. Oh, for tonight it was there earlier today too. Small businesses, the environment, small and unique businesses. Available parking. You want to make sure that there's enough parking. Oh, diversity popped up a couple times. Here we go. Ability to have growth react to market demand. Who made that statement? Would you be willing to unmute and kind of explain what your thinking is on that so I understand that comment?
Yeah, this is John. I think just there's a lot happening in Overlake currently with housing and redevelopment options that I think
Mhm.
there's been a flexibility there's been flexibility within the zoning to allow for that, and just as things continue to develop, I think it's good to maintain that flexibility.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. That's helpful context. Just for additional context from our standpoint, that is something we're very interested in. We want to be focused on outcomes and not necessarily how we get there. So what we're looking at to do with whatever code updates or policy updates we are envisioning, um, to build in flexibility into that system. So the choices for each development might wildly differ based on the actual site itself, some site constraints or costs, or just the desires of the development um, itself and the folks that are leading it. And we want to be able to allow that flexibility to occur as long as we meet our end goals, right? So definitely what we're looking to do. Maintain small businesses. We're definitely focused on the small businesses in Overlake. We've done a lot of outreach this year, and we're going to continue to do even more outreach over the next 12 to 15 months on that. Wildlife habitat and diversity, wetland areas. Okay, frequently. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. So, kind of on the other piece of that, what do we want to add, right? So, what services or amenities do we think we'll need? Or what do we need right now that's just not there? But especially as we start to grow. So some things to think about are we're going to have more people in that area, but we're also trying to attract and address the needs of families. The Housing Action Plan and the study that was done last year really identified a significant need for family housing. And so we're going to be looking at how do we accommodate families within this area, but what does that mean? What are their needs? Not just for small children like daycare, but what happens to uh, middle school or teenagers after school? Are there places for them to go and hang out or play? Or so some of the services and amenities for families as we go. So